For 7 long years, Eliza Mercer lived alone on the edge of the Arizona frontier, in a place most people passed without a second glance. The settlement of Dust Ridge was less a town and more a scattering of half-forgotten buildings. An abandoned trading post, the burned remains of a livery stable, and a few stubborn homesteads clinging to life against the unforgiving desert. Eliza's cabin stood farthest from the old road, backed by red stone hills and wide stretches of sagebrush. It had once been her husband's dream. Now it was her burden and her shield. Eliza had come west as a newlywed, full of hope and fear in equal measure. Her husband, Thomas Mercer, had believed the frontier would offer freedom and land enough for a future family. Instead, 2 years after they arrived, Thomas was killed during a skirmish between settlers and native warriors passing through the region. The truth of what happened was never clear, only that Eliza was left a widow at 23, with no family, no protection, and no path back east. Most women in her position would have fled. Eliza stayed. She learned to trap rabbits, to mend her own roof, to fire a rifle despite hands that shook at first. The loneliness was crushing in those early years. Yet stubborn survival grew into quiet strength. The world had taken her husband, but it would not take her will. By the time 7 years had passed, the townsfolk who still lingered in nearby settlements whispered about the widow on the ridge, as if she were part ghost, part desert spirit, silent, untouchable. But the world she thought she understood was changing. In the weeks before everything happened, Eliza noticed signs she had not seen in years. Distant smoke columns, hoofprints too large for settlers' horses, unease among the few traders who still traveled the old road. The frontier was shifting again. Conflicts between settlers, soldiers, and Apache bands were intensifying, as more land was stolen and more treaties were broken. Eliza stayed out of it all. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant invisibility. On the morning everything changed, the sky was a dull bronze color, heavy with coming heat. Eliza was hauling water from the shallow well near her cabin when her dog, Scout, began to growl, a low, warning sound she had never heard from him before. She froze. Her hand crept toward the rifle resting by the door. Then she saw them. 4 riders crested the ridge behind her cabin, moving with deliberate calm. They were enormous men, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, their horses moving as if guided by a single will. Their long hair was braided with leather and beads. Their faces were painted with dark streaks of red and black. Even at a distance, their presence filled the land with tension. Apache warriors. Eliza's breath caught in her chest. Every instinct screamed for her to run inside and bolt the door. But another instinct, older, quieter, told her that running would only provoke pursuit. She stood frozen beside the well, water bucket trembling in her grip. The riders stopped several yards from her. The leader dismounted first. He was taller than the others, his expression unreadable, eyes sharp as flint. Scar lines traced his cheek. He studied Eliza not as prey, but as a fact, something that existed and must be reckoned with. After a long silence, he spoke in slow, measured English. "Pack your things," he said. "Come with us." Eliza felt the world tilt. For years she had feared an attack, a theft, a killing in the night. She had never imagined this, an order to leave everything behind and go with 4 warriors into land she did not know. "I won't go," she said, voice shaking despite herself. The warrior's gaze did not change. "You will." Fear surged through her like fire. She thought of her husband's grave beside the cabin. She thought of the nights she had survived alone. She thought of every inch of earth she had fought to keep. "Why?" she demanded. This time, the man hesitated. Finally, he said, "Because this land will burn by tomorrow's sun. Soldiers are moving. Settlers will follow. If you stay, you will die with it." Eliza searched their faces for signs of deception. She saw none, only urgency, and beneath it, something else she did not understand. The other three warriors watched in silence, eyes alert, hands near their weapons but not threatening. "You expect me to trust you?" she asked bitterly. "You already trust death by staying," the man replied calmly. "We offer another way." The simplicity of the statement frightened her more than any threat could have. Everything she had built, her cabin, her fields of struggling corn, her memories, would be ash within a day. She could feel it in her bones. The frontier had taught her how quickly destruction came. Her gaze drifted to Scout, who had stopped growling but now stood stiff at her side. He too seemed to sense the truth in the warrior's words. Eliza swallowed. "If I go," she said carefully, "I go under my own will, not as a prisoner." The leader studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You will walk as a guest, as long as you do not try to run." Her heart pounded as she stepped inside the cabin for the last time. She moved as if in a dream, packing only what she could carry: her husband's old journal, a wool blanket, dried food, a small mirror, her rifle. She stood for a moment at Thomas's grave, whispering a goodbye that felt like another quiet death. When she emerged, the warriors waited without impatience. One of them took her bundle and secured it to a pack horse. Another helped her mount. The leader swung up beside her without ceremony. As they turned away from the homestead, Eliza did not look back, not because she was brave, but because she knew that if she did, she would not be able to move. They rode into the desert, away from every certainty she had ever known. By nightfall, they made camp in a rocky canyon hidden from view. Fires were kept low. The warriors spoke little. Eliza sat apart, wrapped in her blanket, heart pounding with questions. She did not know whether she had been spared or captured, only that her life now rested in the hands of 4 men she did not understand. The leader approached her fire as the moon rose. "My name is Talon of the Red Mesa," he said. "Tomorrow, the old world you knew will be gone." Eliza looked at him steadily. "And what world are you taking me to?" He paused before answering. "One that will test you more than this one ever has." As the desert wind whispered through the canyon, Eliza realized that survival had only been the beginning of her story. What lay ahead would demand far more than endurance. It would demand courage of a kind she had never yet been forced to find. By dawn, Eliza's world had already changed beyond recognition. The canyon where they had camped lay cold and quiet beneath the pale pink sky. Frost shimmered on the stones, and the last embers of the warriors' low fire pulsed faintly like dying hearts. Eliza stirred beneath her blanket as one of the Apache men rose silently and began saddling the horses. She had barely slept. Every sound, every shift of shadows, had kept her half awake with fear and confusion. Talon approached her just as the sun crested the canyon rim. "We ride hard today," he said. "Soldiers will be searching by midday." Eliza's stomach clenched. "For me?" For everyone, he replied. This land belongs to no one anymore. That makes it dangerous to all. She mounted stiffly, muscles aching from cold and tension. The four warriors formed a loose diamond around her as they rode out of the canyon and into aching open desert. It was only then that Eliza truly understood how exposed she was. There were no trees, no buildings, only rock, dust, and endless sky. If she fell behind, she would be left. If she tried to flee, she would be caught within minutes. Yet none of them tied her hands or bound her to her saddle. That unsettled her more than ropes would have. By midday, they crossed into scorched territory, blackened ground where grass had burned down to ash. Wagon tracks cut through the ruin like scars. Eliza recognized the signs of violence: broken crates, a smashed barrel, a lone wheel half sunk into sand, a recently destroyed settler camp. Her throat tightened. "This is what you meant," she whispered. Talon nodded. Yes. They drank from a narrow stream and pressed on. Heat crushed down on them, baking fear into her bones. Still, the warriors showed no sign of slowing. Their endurance was frightening, almost unreal. Only once did Talon allow a brief stop so Eliza could rest her trembling legs. Late in the afternoon, they heard it, the distant thunder of hooves. Talon raised his fist. Instantly, the group scattered into cover among the rocks. Eliza was yanked from her horse and pulled behind a boulder before she could speak. Below them, a patrol of U.S. cavalry thundered across the valley floor, rifles gleaming, flags snapping in the wind. Eliza pressed her hand to her mouth, terrified that her breath alone might betray them. The soldiers passed without noticing the hidden group. For the first time since her capture, since her rescue, however one chose to view it, Eliza saw death pass so closely that it left frost along her spine. "You saved me," she whispered when it was over. Talon looked at her steadily. "No," he said, "you saved yourself by coming." The words echoed painfully in her chest. That night, they camped in a narrow ravine, sheltered by rock walls. The warriors built a proper fire this time. One of them, broad and quiet, with gray streaking his hair, handed Eliza a strip of dried meat and a sip of water without speaking. It struck her then that none of them had shown her cruelty, only caution. She studied the men as they sat around the flames. The youngest, who could not have been more than 20, examined the stars with childlike wonder. The scarred one, with heavy shoulders, sharpened his knife in silence. The gray-haired warrior murmured words in Apache she could not understand. And Talon, always Talon, sat apart, gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the fire. "Why me?" Eliza asked suddenly, the question bursting free before fear could choke it. "You could have left me to die like the others. Why didn't you?" The fire crackled. The men exchanged brief glances. Talon answered at last, "Because you were alone, and because your death would bring blood from both sides." She frowned. "My death wouldn't mean anything to the army. It would mean something to my people," he said. "They would believe we killed you. That would bring soldiers, and soldiers bring burning." Eliza absorbed the truth slowly. He wasn't only a person to them. She was a spark that could ignite a war. Yet there was something else beneath his words, an unspoken weight that made his voice quieter than before. She did not press him, but the question lingered in her mind. The following days blurred into exhaustion and dust. They traveled through mountain passes, across dry riverbeds, through cactus-choked valleys where even the wind seemed to bleed. Each night, Eliza collapsed beside the fire, with aching muscles. She learned how to ration water, how to wrap her head against the sun, how to sit a long ride without tearing her skin raw. The warriors did not speak much, but they watched her closely. When she stumbled, one of them would steady her arm. When her horse grew tired, they quietly shifted her to a fresher mount. They never touched her without purpose. That restraint unsettled her nearly as much as their strength. On the fourth day, the danger finally found them. They were crossing a narrow pass when gunfire split the air. Bullets struck stone inches from Eliza's head. Her horse screamed and reared. In an instant, Talon dragged her from the saddle and shoved her flat to the ground. A small group of armed settlers burst from behind the rocks, men who looked half-starved, half-mad with fear. They fired wildly, shouting that the Apache had stolen their land, their cattle, their women. The fight was fast, terrifying, final. When the smoke cleared, the settlers lay motionless on the stone. None of the warriors were dead, though one bled from a shallow wound in his side. Eliza knelt trembling in the dust, bile burning her throat. She had seen death before, but never this close, never so sudden. Talon crouched beside her. "Look at me," he said firmly. She obeyed, despite the shaking in her bones. "You are alive. Remember that." That night, Eliza wept for the men who had died, and for the fragile line that kept her alive while the world around her burned. Something inside her changed after that ambush. Fear remained, but it was no longer blind fear. It was sharpened into understanding. These men were not monsters. They were survivors, and she was now bound to their fate, whether she wished it or not. The final leg of the journey took them deep into territory that no map marked. Tall cliffs closed around them. The air smelled of pine and cool stone rather than dust. When they finally descended into a wide, hidden valley, scattered with lodges and grazing horses, Eliza realized they had reached the edge of another world entirely. Apache children stared openly at her. Women paused in their work, their expressions unreadable. Warriors stepped aside as Talon rode in with her at his side. "You are safe here," he told her quietly. Eliza did not know if she believed him, but she knew one thing with terrible clarity. She was no longer a widow of Dust Ridge. She was now a stranger among the Apache, and the future that awaited her was wrapped in mystery, danger, and something far deeper than fear. The valley did not feel like a battlefield. That was the first thing that confused Eliza. After days of dust, gunfire, burned land, and death, she had expected darkness and cruelty to define the Apache settlement. Instead, what she saw unsettled her in a different way. Life. Children chased each other between the lodges. Women pounded grain and tended small cooking fires. Horses grazed peacefully near the stream that wound through the valley like a silver ribbon. The air smelled of smoke, pine, and cooking meat, not blood. Yet every eye followed her. Eliza felt suddenly small beneath their stares. She was still mounted behind Talon, riding into the heart of a people she had been taught to fear her entire life. Her hands trembled as she dismounted, unsure of where to stand, how to behave. Whether one wrong move would cost her everything. An older woman approached first. Her hair was silver, braided down her back, decorated with bits of turquoise. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She studied Eliza with quiet intensity before turning to Talon and speaking rapidly in Apache. Their words were low but urgent. Talon answered calmly. His voice never rose. The woman finally turned back to Eliza. She spoke slow, halting English. "You are the woman from the burning land." Eliza swallowed. "Yes." The woman nodded once. "I am Naya, keeper of this valley. You are not chained. That means you are not prisoner." Relief rushed through Eliza so hard it made her dizzy. "Then what am I?" Naya studied her again. "That we will decide." She was given a small lodge near the edge of the camp, guarded not by ropes or bars, but by watchful eyes. A young woman named Ishma brought her water and bread that first evening. Ishma could not speak English, but her gestures were gentle. She showed Eliza where to sleep and how to signal that she needed help. Despite the exhaustion crushing her bones, Eliza barely slept that night. Every unfamiliar sound startled her awake. Drums echoed faintly from somewhere deep within the valley. The soft voices of Apache speech flowed through the darkness like water. She lay rigid beneath her blanket, acutely aware that she was a lone settler woman among warriors whose way of life had been shaped by war. At dawn, Naya summoned her. Eliza stood at the edge of a fire circle, where several elders were already seated. Talon stood slightly apart. The air was thick with quiet authority. She felt as though she were standing before a court that did not require chains to bind her. Naya spoke first. "You were taken from land that will burn." Eliza nodded slowly. "You were not harmed." "No." "You were not traded or touched." "No." Murmurs passed among the elders. "Then why do you believe your presence here is dangerous?" Naya asked. Eliza hesitated. Then she spoke honestly. "Because my people kill yours, and your people kill mine, and I stand between both, with no shield but your word." Silence followed. At last, Talon stepped forward. "She is here because she chose life. I will answer for her." Naya studied him carefully. "Then you will carry the weight of her fate." That was how it happened. From that morning on, Eliza was placed under Talon's protection, not as property, not as a captive, but as a living responsibility. Life among the Apache unfolded slowly, cautiously. Eliza learned without being taught. She learned that the valley was hidden by natural cliffs and shifting paths known only to the tribe. She learned that patience was prized above speed, observation above impulse. She learned that strength here was not loud, it was steady. At first, she was given small tasks: carrying water, grinding seed, mending hides. Her hands blistered, but no one mocked her. Ishma worked beside her each day, patiently correcting her movements through gesture and example. Though they shared no language at first, understanding found its way between them. Children were the quickest to accept her. They approached with curiosity rather than suspicion, touching her pale hair with wide-eyed fascination, laughing when she attempted broken Apache words. Their easy trust unsettled her. It reminded her that fear was often learned before it was earned. Not everyone welcomed her presence. Some of the warriors avoided her entirely. Others watched her with open hostility. She felt their anger like heat against her skin. She did not blame them. Her people had burned villages, slaughtered families. She carried that history in the color of her skin and the language of her birth. And yet, each evening, Talon checked on her without fail. He never lingered longer than necessary, never spoke more than a few words. But his presence was constant, solid as stone. One night, unable to contain herself, she finally asked, Why did you take this burden on yourself? He stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. Because if I had not, someone else would have decided your fate, and not all would have chosen mercy. The truth of that settled heavily inside her. Weeks passed. Eliza's body grew stronger. The ache of grief that had once ruled her softened into something quieter, still present, but no longer suffocating. For the first time since her husband's death, she was not simply surviving. She was living within a community, limited as her role was. Then the soldiers came close again. Scouts brought word that cavalry units were moving through the eastern valleys. Smoke signals appeared on the distant ridges. Tension coiled through the camp like a living thing. Warriors sharpened blades. Horses were readied for swift travel. Fear returned to Eliza in full force. One evening, she found Talon saddling his horse under a darkening sky. "They're searching for me," she whispered. "They are searching for all of us," he answered grimly. "If I leave, if I turn myself in, you won't be hunted." He finally looked at her, sharp and unyielding. "You believe your life weighs more than ours?" She flinched. "Your surrender would not bring peace," he continued. "It would bring more soldiers, more burning, more graves." His words shattered her illusion of simple sacrifice. That night, a decision was made among the elders. The camp would move deeper into the mountains before the cavalry closed in. The valley would be abandoned by dawn. As Eliza packed her few belongings, dread tightened in her chest. "Where would I go after that?" she asked Talon. "You will go where the tribe goes, until the danger passes." "And after?" He did not answer. The relocation was swift and silent. Fires were doused, tracks were covered. Even the children sensed the danger and moved without complaint. The hidden valley that had briefly become Eliza's world vanished behind them like a dream dissolving at sunrise. 2 days into the mountain ascent, a rider arrived with devastating news. Dust Ridge had burned. Everything Eliza had left behind, her cabin, her fields, her husband's grave, had been erased in a single sweep of fire and violence. No settlers remained alive. Soldiers had passed through afterward and taken nothing but ash. Eliza collapsed to her knees when she heard. Years of endurance, of stubborn clinging, of quiet survival, all reduced to smoke. She wept without shame, without restraint, grief tearing through her like the desert wind. No one spoke to her. No one turned away. Talon stood beside her in silence as she cried. When the storm inside her finally broke quiet, he said softly, "You have no home behind you now." She nodded weakly. "There is only the path ahead." In that moment, Eliza understood with aching clarity. The Apache had not only taken her from her land, war had taken that land from her forever. And now, bound by fate rather than chains, she walked forward into a future she could never have imagined. One where survival would demand not just strength, but loyalty, identity, and the courage to stand between two worlds that refused to understand each other. The mountains were unforgiving. After leaving the hidden valley, Eliza and the Apache band traveled for days along narrow, rocky passes where the air was thin, the sun harsh, and water scarce. Each step tested her endurance. Every climb left her legs trembling, muscles screaming, and lungs burning. The Apache warriors, however, seemed to glide over the stone as if gravity itself obeyed them. Talon moved beside her silently, adjusting her saddle. guiding her over sharp ridges and subtly correcting her footing without a word. At first, she resented him. The constant presence reminded her that she was under someone's control, even if it was only for survival. Every glance he gave her, every silent gesture, felt like a quiet judgment. Yet, paradoxically, it also gave her a sense of security she hadn't known in years. She couldn't explain it. She wanted to hate him for the power he held, but she couldn't. Something deeper stirred inside her, a strange respect mixed with fear and curiosity. By the third day, she realized survival depended on trust. She couldn't move like a shadow, as she had in Dust Ridge, because that would slow the group and endanger everyone. She had to follow, to obey, to learn, even when it meant swallowing fear and pride. Slowly, she began to notice patterns in the men, the way they read the land, how they communicated silently through subtle gestures, the precision with which they worked together. It was a language she did not know, but instinctively understood. The first real test of trust came unexpectedly. They were descending a narrow cliffside path when Eliza's horse stumbled on loose rock. She cried out, and the animal panicked, nearly tipping her over the edge. Before she could even react, Talon had caught her by the waist, pressing her against his chest with a strength that nearly crushed her ribs. He steadied the horse with one hand, while keeping her alive with the other. The moment lasted only seconds, but in that instant, fear, gratitude, and something unspoken passed between them. "Do not let fear control you," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper above the wind. "Trust yourself. Trust the mountain. Trust us." Eliza nodded, trembling, realizing the depth of his words. This wasn't just about her staying alive. It was about her learning to navigate a world where fear alone could not guide her choices. Her survival depended on collaboration, courage, and the ability to let go of old attachments. Nightfall brought another challenge. A sudden storm swept through the peaks, violent winds tearing at their cloaks, freezing rain soaking their hides, lightning striking perilously close to the rocky trails. The group huddled in a sheltered crevice. The youngest warrior shivered uncontrollably, teeth chattering, and Eliza, surprisingly, found herself helping him. She shared her blanket, held his arm, whispered soothing words in broken Apache. Her hands were numb, her face raw from the cold, yet for the first time in years, she felt needed, not merely tolerated, not merely observed, but necessary. It was a sensation foreign to her, yet profound. The storm lasted through the night. When dawn finally broke, the trail ahead was slick, treacherous, and full of new perils. But with each step, each careful maneuver, Eliza felt herself becoming more capable, more attuned to the world around her. The fear was still there, but it had shifted, tempered by awareness, sharpened into vigilance. Weeks passed in this way, the band moving silently through the mountains, occasionally resting in hidden glens, scavenging what food they could find, avoiding soldiers, and encountering only the occasional wanderer brave or foolish enough to cross their path. Slowly, Eliza began to earn the tentative respect of the warriors. Small acts, a well-packed saddle, a correctly tended fire, an observation of distant tracks earned nods of approval. Silence turned to brief words, gestures became fuller, and a fragile bond formed. And then came the moment she had not anticipated. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, crossing a high ridge, Eliza and Talon were alone while the others set up camp. The sky was painted with molten colors of sunset, The wind calm after weeks of storms. Eliza, exhausted, sank to her knees beside the small fire. Talon watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You have changed," he said quietly. Eliza lifted her head, startled. What do you mean?" "You are no longer the woman of Dust Ridge," he said. "You are one of us now, in mind, if not in blood." She laughed bitterly. "I am nothing of yours. You brought me here. You saved me. But I am still a stranger." He smiled faintly, the first time she had seen any warmth in his expression. "Perhaps," he said, "but strangers are temporary. Survivors endure." The words struck her deeply. There was truth in them, and yet more. A silent acknowledgement of something they both felt, but did not speak. A tension hung in the air, electric and intimate, though neither would name it. That night, sleep came fitfully. She dreamt of Dust Ridge burning, of soldiers and fire, of her husband's grave reduced to ash. But beneath it, in a corner of her mind, was another dream, one of belonging, of strength, of quiet companionship beside Talon and the people he called family. It frightened her as much as it comforted her. The following days tested both her resolve and the fragile trust she had built. A small scouting party of soldiers caught sight of their group from a distance. The warriors moved swiftly, hiding trails, misleading trackers, and preparing ambushes if needed. Eliza rode beside Talon, heart hammering, knowing a single misstep could result in her death. Yet she followed instructions perfectly, mirroring the men's silent gestures and anticipating danger before it arrived. Talon's approving nod, when the threat passed, felt like a reward far more valuable than words could provide. It was during one of these tense moments that she realized the full depth of her transformation. Once she had been weak, frightened, isolated, a woman clinging to memory and survival in the ruins of Dust Ridge. Now she was alert, strong, and part of a living, breathing group that trusted her judgment and relied on her presence. She was no longer merely surviving. She was participating in a life built on courage, loyalty, and mutual respect. And though she would never admit it aloud, she felt an awakening within herself, a stir of desire and emotion for Talon, the man who had both saved and challenged her in ways she could barely comprehend. One night, under the shelter of an ancient pine grove, Talon spoke to her again. "You have survived more than most. You are stronger than you know." Eliza looked at him, heart pounding. "And yet I still fear the world." "You will always fear," he said. "But now you have the choice of how to face it. You have learned trust. You have learned endurance. And now, perhaps, you will learn courage in other ways." Eliza's gaze fell to the fire. She did not yet understand all he meant, but she felt it in her chest, the stirrings of something new, something dangerous and thrilling. In the heart of mountains, among people she had once feared, she discovered not only survival, but a tentative hope. And with it, a question that haunted her as much as the wind in the peaks. Could she also allow herself to feel something for the man who had become her protector, her teacher, and the keeper of her fragile trust? For the first time in 7 years, she did not feel completely alone. And HRNP. By now, she no longer felt like the fragile woman who had clung desperately to life in Dust Ridge. She was strong, agile, and aware in ways that would have been impossible in her old world. Her hands bore calluses from mending hides, gathering firewood, and riding for days on end. Her legs were hardened from climbing rocky passes. Her heart had been tested repeatedly by fear, loss, and the ever-present shadow of death. And through it all, a deeper sense of self had emerged, one forged not by isolation, but by endurance, companionship, and the courage to trust. Talon had become a constant in her life, not as a lover yet, not as a master, but as a steady force. He guided, corrected, and protected her, yet never dominated her. There was a rhythm to his presence, sometimes quiet, sometimes commanding, but always aware. Eliza had come to rely on it, not as a crutch, but as a measure of her own growth. With him beside her, she felt a balance between caution and freedom, fear and courage. And though she would not speak the truth aloud, her heart recognized something deeper stirring within her. An attraction, an admiration, a bond that neither could yet name. The Apache people had slowly accepted her. While she would never be one of them by birth, her actions, resilience, and willingness to learn earned their respect. Children laughed openly around her. Warriors exchanged quiet nods of acknowledgement. Women brought her food, shared their knowledge, and tolerated her occasional mistakes with patience. And in return, Eliza learned not just to survive in this new world, but to live within it, to participate, to contribute, and to belong. The turning point came one morning as the group prepared to cross a high, snow-dusted pass. The wind was sharp, and the air thin. Visibility was low. Eliza and Talon rode side by side, flanking the younger warriors who were still learning the terrain. Suddenly, the sharp sound of rifle fire split the silence. Soldiers had found them. Eliza's pulse thundered in her chest. The mountains could protect them, but only if they moved with precision. Instantly, she remembered every lesson, every warning, every subtle gesture from Talon and the other warriors. She ducked behind a boulder, signaling the others. Her voice, when she finally called instructions, was clear and steady, guiding the youngest warrior to a safer position. Her fear was there, raw and sharp, but it did not dominate her. The confrontation was brief. The Apache band moved with practiced precision. The soldiers were caught in a deadly trap of narrow cliffs and natural cover. By the end, they were forced to retreat, leaving the group unscathed. Eliza, though trembling from adrenaline, felt a fierce pride. She had played a crucial part. She had contributed to the survival of the people who had saved her. The realization settled deep within her. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a participant in shaping her fate. That evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, Talon approached her again. The firelight danced across his sharp features, highlighting the strength and vulnerability she had come to know. "You were remarkable today," he said, his voice low, carrying both pride and an unspoken intimacy. Eliza looked at him, heart racing. "I only did what you taught me," she replied, though the truth was more complicated. She had done more than follow instructions. She had learned, adapted, and acted on her own. That recognition of her own strength stirred something fierce inside her, a confidence she had never known in Dust Ridge. They rode in silence for some time, the bond between them unspoken yet palpable. Then, Talon spoke, quieter than before. "The world you knew is gone. Dust Ridge is ashes. Your husband's land is lost. The life you imagined no longer exists." Eliza swallowed. Then, "What do I do now?" He turned his gaze to the distant mountains. "You live, you choose, and perhaps you find a life worth protecting." The words were simple, yet heavy with possibility. For the first time, Eliza glimpsed a future not dictated by fear, loss, or isolation. She could build a new life, not one tethered to the ruins of the past, but one rooted in strength, courage, and the bonds she had forged in the mountains. The days that followed were marked by quiet routines and subtle transformations. Eliza learned to ride like a warrior, to navigate the forests and passes with precision, to read the tracks of both animals and humans, to anticipate danger before it arrived. She worked alongside the women, shared knowledge, and even taught some of the younger children small skills from her old world, creating bridges between cultures. She discovered joy in simple tasks, a shared meal, the laughter of children, the satisfaction of a well-tended fire. And she discovered something else: connection. Small moments with Talon, a guiding hand on a difficult ridge, a shared look across the campfire, a quiet conversation under the stars, built into something neither could deny. Respect had grown into trust. Trust had begun to awaken deeper feelings, tempered by the challenges they faced together. One evening, as the group settled near a hidden stream, Talon sat beside her in the firelight. "You have changed," he said, "not just in skill or courage, but in spirit. You belong here, if you choose to." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought I would feel that again," she admitted softly. "Not after Dust Ridge." Talon reached out, a tentative gesture, his hand hovering near hers. She did not pull away. The connection between them, born of survival and shared trials, was undeniable. "Then stay," he said simply. "Choose life with us." Eliza looked around at the valley, the people who had taken her in, the mountains that had tested her, the warriors who had shaped her growth, and she realized that she had already made the choice. She had survived, learned, and endured. Now she could live, fully, not as a widow of the past, but as a woman of her own making, guided by courage, loyalty, and love. She placed her hand in Talon's. The firelight reflected in both their eyes, a silent acknowledgement of what words could not capture: shared hardship, mutual respect, and the stirring of a bond deeper than survival alone. Here, in the mountains, she had found more than refuge. She had found belonging, purpose, and the possibility of love. The journey that had begun with an abrupt command, "Pack your things and come with us," had carried her from isolation, fear, and loss into a new life, forged in the crucible of danger, trust, and endurance. Dust Ridge no longer existed. Her past no longer defined her. The future, uncertain and untamed as the mountains themselves, awaited her embrace. And for the first time in 7 years, Eliza Mercer smiled without hesitation, knowing that she had survived not just to endure, but to live, belong, and love in a world she had once believed was lost to her forever.